at the top of Solano, although I understand that's going to be a new bakery, but this will be one within our city limits, so.
Awesome.
Any word on how the Sprouts and businesses in that development are doing?
That turns it off now.
Oh,
It's on.
any,
I think on the whole, they're doing well. They do still have the two shells that are available. Well, I guess that's one shell. They were actually talking about splitting it into two shells. They've had kind of different tenants consider the space, but nothing has come together yet. The last I heard, a bank had approached the new property owner, but I don't think that has materialized.
Okay. And then 6.3, update on complete street planning process for Upper Solano Ave.
Yes, so,
Oh, I'm sorry. Before moving into that, it's a small nomenclature issue.
What's that?
The Solano Avenue Association always recommends the use of the west end or the east end of Solano Avenue versus the top of the street or the bottom of the street or upper
okay.
Solano, lower Solano. It just kind of sounds cooler, east-west. It's just the Solano Avenue Association's opinion, so I just thought I would express that.
okay.
I think that's good to have those kind of district nomenclatures, so to speak. So,
No one wants to be in lower Solano or the bottom of the street, right? Well, maybe. We'll see. Anyway, thank you for listening.
Okay, so, well, with that, I'll revise my opening statement on Solano. So it is the eastern part of the corridor within the city of Albany, between Masonic up to the city limit line, and we had our workshop last Wednesday with a consultant. We had a really great turnout. About 40 people showed up for the site walk. We had 60 in total participate in the workshop, which we had at the community center. It was really great. Our consultant did a great job. We had big 15-foot long maps of the corridor and stickers and participants running kind of the age spectrum. Some new faces I hadn't seen before, kind of all identifying their favorite places on the corridor and areas where they think conditions could be improved. So from that point, our consultants were here for a couple of days, synthesizing all of that information, and they'll come back to us with some conceptual ideas. We expect, and there, of course, will be more information, but we're going to have another event in the fall, most likely at the end of September, and then from that point, it will go more to the commission committee review level.
so then it would be, the next step in theory would be design, and you have money for design? Or
Well,
you have to apply for that?
It's going to be kind of designed at a very high level, really conceptual plans, and then once the plan is adopted, we would pursue grant funding for design work and construction.
But in theory, it's about a 4-year process, 5, to get it actually implemented, you think?
Probably a little longer. I would think
Yeah.
probably 6 to 7 years. And just for the committee's benefit, some of it's looking at right-of-way changes, but there are other things, and Alan can attest to this because he's on our technical review committee. There are other things you observe when you're looking at it through that lens, like the street signs don't always match from block to block, the light standards don't necessarily match. So there's other sort of street treatments which have an impact on the businesses, but there's just not the cohesiveness there. So this plan will address that.
is that cohesiveness going to continue into the part of Solano Avenue that is Berkeley on one side and Albany on the other?
Yes, and I'm really glad you asked that question because there was some concern. I think when people see that portion of the street, they make the assumption that, well, that's Berkeley, that's not Albany. But in fact, the area in the public realm, the curb, the sidewalk, the on-street parking, storm drain sewers, that's all City of Albany. So we do have some discretion in terms of how we treat that area.
Great.
Okay. So let's move on to item 6.4, Instagram and social media update.
Just a quick announcement that we have hired, not us specifically, but Jeremy Allen, our AV guru, has hired a social media person, and she started last week, and it seems like she's going to be great. So there will be more to come.
Yes, and I'm actually meeting with her and Jeremy in the next couple weeks. And so, John, in particular, you had expressed some interest in highlighting businesses in Albany through social media. So maybe we can connect on any messaging. And if anyone else has anything that they want to share, I'm open to sharing that with our new social media person.
What types of things will they be featuring and highlighting?
I think that's yet to be worked out. So we're open to suggestions if there's particular themes that you think would be good for us to focus on.
Yeah, I think it is worth noting, after this was agendized, I think in March or so, we actually talked to Jeremy about it. So we do have an Instagram account for economic development. It's not Albany Economic Development. I think it's Albany Live.
Albany Local or Local Albany or something.
I think we missed out to Albany, Georgia. They had already had one of those, so.
Is it active?
Not yet. We have the username, but Alexandra, who's our Instagram or our social media person, is going to be the one primarily using it.
Good, well, thank you. I look forward to having that conversation. Awesome.
Before we leave number 6, can I make a comment as well?
Yes, you may.
Good. So I just wanted to compliment the team of consultants that you hired for Complete Street. So we attended all the workshops, and they really ran a tight ship. They're out of Sacramento and did a great job. And the turnout for all those workshops was phenomenal.
It was great. Yeah.
Yeah, phenomenal. So good job. Yeah.
Yeah, we actually we have, LGC is the group out of Sacramento, that's Local Government Commission. They've helped with outreach, and Tool Design Group out of Oakland has worked more on the technical planning issues. But yeah, they've been terrific, both great, both wonderful to work with.
Okay, so before we move to 7, does anyone have a comment on item 6? All right, 7, discussion and possible action, 7-1, draft facade template.
So we left on the dais, I think you should have a 4-page folded. Yeah, Claire and I can share. This is part of your economic development, the implementation plan. And the idea is that this provides a little more guidance on facade design and storefront signage. And within that, we had one of our our contract planner work on this and kind of put together some helpful information in terms of working with the city and also when permitting is required. What's required, and then specifically providing examples of more desirable facades. We've had this discussion at other meetings where we want to get towards a place where we're, I think, ultimately discouraging awnings and really looking at, again, a cohesive treatment of the facade. This is the draft form, so we're welcome to take any comments, edits, recommendations that you have and refine this further.
What is the official stance on awnings? Is it that they're discouraged, or are they flat out banned? Or?
They're still permitted within the city's municipal code, but I think kind of going forward, as we're looking at this with a bit of more of critical eye, we may be looking to get away from the awnings. In fact, on our walk, Jennifer pointed this out. Solano Lighting has an awning over, but when you're standing underneath, they actually have really cool original signage. It needs a little TLC, but it's kind of the perfect example of, it restricts light into the space, and there's something a little more unique there than a simple canvas awning.
To the point, if it is allowed, it may be a good idea to have some samples of what good awning looks like, so they can have that option if they want to go in that direction, because there's obvious bad awning. There's probably 90% bad awnings versus the good awnings, which maybe takes into account the tenant's need, but yet achieves the goal of what we're trying to accomplish on the street.
Another challenge, I think, with awnings is that people don't upkeep them and clean them regularly or repair them. Or they simply paint over the previous logo and then put in a new one, but you can still see the old one. So maybe there's some tightening up that could be done. I mean, I recently installed an awning in one of my stores, and it's been amazing, the response of people saying, when did you move to Walnut Creek? I'm like, well, it's been
Been there for years.
since
yeah.
2010. But, you know, they didn't notice us, and now all of a sudden, like, our visibility has increased a lot.
So this struck me at the last meeting. What is this, what's the budget of this program?
I don't think, you mean in terms of
What
like a facade?
grants would be available for people to apply for? This is not, had
No
nothing to
grant.
do with the Chamber of Commerce's grant facade improvement program.
This is unrelated to that.
Okay.
That hasn't been worked out.
Okay. I guess what my concern is, you know, the city is being hit hard by graffiti. And if at some point you're talking about spending $5,000 on some sort of facade improvement, $5,000 would go a long ways to hiring someone who's dedicated to just clean up graffiti. And I think universally, it would make a larger impact on the environment of the guest citywide, rather than focusing on an awning here or there. So I'm sorry, I confused it. I thought the city would be helping to finance these awnings, so I'm kind of going to roll it all back, with the exception of standing by my comment about graffiti, that it's just bad.
So you're anti-graffiti.
I am just a little anti-graffiti. There's nothing artistic about it, especially when it's on private or public property. Public property.
Okay, so any other,
Following up from our last conversation about graffiti, I have been going down the road of trying to get approval to get the boxes on the side street on Evelyn in front of my store painted. And it sounds like we have to get approval, but then when I talked to the utility company, they said, oh, no, we take care of that. You just have to report the graffiti, and we will send out a crew to do it. And I said, okay, well, I'd like to report it. I had to call a different number. I reported it. Nothing's happened. But apparently, there is a system in place. So if you see graffiti on those utility boxes, you can call the utility company, and they're supposed to come and service it or paint over it.
okay. Well, I don't know if we need an agenda item on this for future, because it's not on the agenda tonight, but if there's something of note that we can be more proactive on that, perhaps bring it on the agenda, we can learn and communicate that to the businesses.
I'm wondering if it might be more appropriate for the Joint Arts and Economic Development Subcommittee to talk about graffiti abatement in the art context, maybe.
That's a great idea.
So back to the flyer or the brochure. People have specific comments on it. I'm going to take a little bit more look. I'll give you my comment in the meantime. Obviously, this is a draft, and I would just be mindful of the color selection so people can read it on the headings. And then the photos, if they're not going to be high resolution and really speak to the improvement, I think it could be better if less could be better. I guess if you can only use 2 pictures versus 4, because of size, but it's just the resolution seems to be off and doesn't really have more of the wow versus what you showed us on the PowerPoint before.
I would also recommend, while you're talking about images, I would blur out the names of the businesses. Just,
Especially when it's the bad.
yeah, you don't want to be this Citibank. Sorry, Citibank, but this is the example. Just
You can white it out or
Yeah.
yeah,
blur it
blur it.
Blur it.
to a degree. If you can, I just feel like we shouldn't be. Nobody should be beating up on a.
Oh, just 1 second. Okay. Any other comments on it? Maybe we can come back.
I think it's a great start.
Okay, let's open it up back.
Great start.
So the idea is that we would mail it, and it's such a rough template that this is actually the area for the address. And in working with our contract planner, she was saying that I think she uses a copy service where, when they print it off and seal it, then we just put the labels or, postage and so on and so forth, and then it's ready to go. Yeah, I mean, I think we would have this at the counter for sure. Definitely when a small business comes in and they have their preliminary questions, we try and work with them as closely as possible. Sometimes they're businesses that, they're a little more, an office use isn't going to come in and do a high level of due diligence like a restaurant might, but, we will be proactive to the extent that we can be.
And one of the reasons why I asked that, just to some background, is like, I have a construction company where we apply for a permit in a different city or anything, we get automatically like, welcome to our city, we're so glad you're here, here's some things that
Right.
we can help you with,
Yeah.
what can we do? So, and my only comment to that would be, being that this is a draft, is making sure that that friendliness comes across in the draft, that it's not just so like, point B and point C, and you gotta do steps 1, 2, and 3. We wanna really encourage people that we want them here. So that would be my.
That's a good point. I mean, when you were talking, I had the same idea that it should be something like the city wants facade improvement, and we're here to help make that happen. If you want it, we want it, kind of a thing. And to speak to the friendliness and that we're receptive versus like, this may or may not happen if you apply, kind of a thing.
Right. Okay. Got it. Thank you.
But besides that, I think the look works. Any other comments?
At the very bottom, under final tips, it says, don't forget about frequently missed items, fire alarms, sprinklers, ADA requirements. It seems that that's more applicable to overall remodels, not specific to facade improvements. So I don't know if that should be reworked or taken out, or.
It's kind of at the discretion of the group, but we sometimes find, someone may get into a space and they may hit some unforeseen circumstance where they have to then, re-budget their construction budget. And so I think this is in there more as a reminder, just to be aware of those things that could affect a budget. Certainly when it comes to fire requirements, the second thing after a business owner deals with us, we say, walk to the fire department now, you're here. Make sure you go over your scope with them so you get a determination as to what's going to be required.
Yep, I'm interrupted.
I think it would be appropriate because in the case of fire alarms, the fire department's going to want to make sure that there's a visible signal outside with a phone number, et cetera, and if it's behind an awning.
In a knockbox.
So I think in the case of that,
But I think, Stephanie, I think what you're saying is, I'm an existing business, I want a new facade, or new awning, new facade, and I may not need this. So this,
So then maybe it's more appropriate, since it's not really a final tip necessarily, we move it over to the other side about what to consider when doing plan preparation. And we can wordsmith it
That's a
so
good
that it
idea,
reads a little
yeah.
more clearly.
or new tenants.
this is
New
kind of like,
tenants.
those are the 3 really important things that are just kind of tossed in there. Oh, by the way,
I mean, they're
Yeah.
definitely very important,
They're
and having been
huge.
through construction in Albany, I mean, those things really, held my project up a lot, and it was a challenge, so I think it's important, but I don't necessarily see it as specific to facade, those things, but,
But if you're, and then to your point, I think if you're a new business going into
Yeah.
it, then you're doing your facade, you're doing tenant improvements, and don't forget, this is important. Yeah, okay, good.
maybe it could be a bubble, like a starburst.
Then everybody will,
Yeah,
they'll be aware.
open, you have door number 1, door number 2.
Yeah. Okay, we can definitely make that change.
Yeah, on the first page, this page, the City of Albany page, you could even say something like, are you a new business owner, comma, welcome to Albany, exclamation point. And, or some way where you're specifically stating it's for new business owners and for people that already have their businesses here. And that gives a sort of welcome thing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Well, we can add just another line in there, are you a new business in the city? And that
So
kind of
welcome,
encompasses that.
And then it could say, like, for all business owners, comma, thinking about a new facade design, something like that, then you're just sort of giving, it's more of an introduction.
I assume the front cover will be in color.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe the existing ones, it could be, we're glad you're here,
a
new
little
ones,
smiley
welcome.
face,
Yeah.
emoticon.
Existing businesses,
Yeah.
we're so glad that you're
I mean,
in
really.
our community, kind of thing.
Right, more friendliness. I see some awnings in the little cartoon.
Okay, any other comments on 7.1? Any other comments, public comments? Hearing none. 7.2, staff update on economic development implementation plan.
Oh, yes, I did have an update. I'm sorry. We are working with the Planning and Zoning Commission on some code changes directly related to the Economic Development Implementation Plan. So we had a discussion at the last meeting in May on the commercial classifications and kind of broadening some definitions, changing some thresholds, modernizing it to some extent to account for like maker businesses, contemporary uses that weren't necessarily part of the code update in 2004, and so that's moving along. We expect that we'll have something back to the commission ideally at the end of July, or maybe September at the latest, and then that would go on to council.
You said next July?
No, well,
This July.
this forthcoming July, yeah.
Yeah, I know Berkeley's having an issue right now with escape rooms and trying to classify them properly, which is trending. And because of the
interesting.
type of permit they require right now, it's a 7-month process, and they're trying to change that right away. So it's amazing how these trends, the tail wags the dog sometimes. you know.
Right, right.
Do we have a clause for us, or is there? What would that be?
That's a
Recreation?
really interesting question. I
be
would
the
think,
same
yeah, it would fall under.
Sorry.
track, probably.
What are we talking about?
Oh, escape rooms are a common thing right now, where you
Escape.
Escape.
where you're in a scenario that you need to get out of, essentially, and it's timed, and usually it's a team effort. And
Puzzles and
there's one in El Cerrito.
I think I know, but
Yeah,
my
they're
daughter
cool.
talked.
Yeah, they're cool.
another trend too that might, I mean, who knows, but that has, come up a lot is experiential museums, like the Museum of Ice Cream or the Color Factory. And I wonder if that's another tricky gray area too to think about.
Paint and wine. It's a 1-day wine permit, right? Anyway.
And anything from the public comment?
Just really quickly, I also attended that meeting, Alan was talking about with the city of Berkeley, and he actually, because we brought up some of the same concerns with the city of Albany, they said they'd be happy to share with you guys what they.
Oh, great, yeah.
Yeah, they're really swimming in dark water. They have no idea. It's all new, so.
A
Wow.
question.
that-
Swimming in dark water.
Oh, just through the permit process
Oh,
and trying to
okay. I
figure
thought
out.
it was another
where all-
experience.
Oh, no. Well, that one has a long release form, though, I'll tell you.
So I'm just curious, when was the zoning last updated in general?
The comprehensive one was done in 2004.
And the general plan was updated when?
It was adopted in 2016.
So in theory, potentially the zoning is not compliant with the general plan?
We didn't do any dramatic changes with the general plan, so we don't have a lot of inconsistencies between the two documents. But I think, there's definitely some gray areas within our code that don't necessarily reflect some of the businesses that we have now.
All right, anything else on 7.2? Then we move on to 7.3. And let's see, we have arts. Any update on the arts?
We're meeting this evening, after this meeting.
Excellent. Okay, short-term goals, I don't think we have an update. Long-term goals,
To make short-term goals.
no update there. Staffing, Charles was in charge on that one, but I have an update on that. So future agenda items, the group, do we have anything that you want?
I'd love to agendize parking if I could. Could I do that?
In what regard, just so we can understand?
Automobile parking.
Pardon?
Automobile parking.
But just in general.
But in terms of timing or curb management or,
Well, I mean,
For
there's
coloring?
a significant loss of spaces recently at Solano and San Pablo, which I can see the need for. There's another project that would lose, 8 spaces or 6 legal spaces to a bike lane at Washington and Solano. I know that the spaces on Masonic at the BART tracks between Solano and the senior center were recently assigned to 4-hour, well, half of it was reassigned to 4-hour parking, and the other half was reassigned to wheelchair accessible parking, which means that all the staff that work on Solano Avenue that used to park by the BART tracks are now parking deeper into the neighborhood by Washington. So I wasn't sure, you know, in terms of economic development, we need accessibility to the businesses by car, boat, train, plane, giraffe, whatever. And I see a lot of parking spaces. I just counted 15.
So the item might be update on parking management, recent changes, something to that effect?
Something to that
And
extent.
would
yeah.
that speak to your question on San Pablo as well?
Because the businesses are needing to.
So maybe just recent changes on San Pablo or in Albany Business District.
Yeah, I'm seeing this as a curb management issue.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool,
Have
that
we ever
sounds really
thought
cool.
about changing the parking from being like where you have to parallel park to being slanted parking on Masonic under the BART tracks? You know, just
The
adjacent to Solano?
diagonal parking? Mm-hmm. I don't know,
Would
like,
we-
I don't know what the spatial requirements are, if that's
Well,
feasible.
maybe that can be brought up when we
Yeah.
have that item. With that
There's
transportation person.
I just sense that there's an imbalance that, you know, it'd be great that for every parking space is removed from a certain area that one is added to equalize it. But my observation has been that there's parking spaces being removed, but no additional.
Yeah, so I
I
think
think
we
it's a
can talk
great
about
idea
that.
to
with-
add that to the agenda for a longer future discussion,
Yeah,
parking.
because I think there was a discussion, I remember in one of the previous meetings about the whole parking issue. So anyway, we'll agendize it and we can talk about it next time. Okay? What? Go ahead.
How it affects that particular business that it might be right in front of. For example, the transmission shop that's been there for multiple years.
Well, maybe what we could do is when we have this agenda item, if you know of someone who's been impacted, you could advise them that this is coming, and so we can hear what the issue is.
And to be clear, that's the cycle track that's proposed for between Washington and
Washington.
and Solano. And I don't. It's in an early stage. It's in Caltrans review. It's not really clear that Caltrans is necessarily going to approve that because there are some. In my mind, there's kind of some conflicts there because you'd be putting a bike lane in front of some driveways to not only the transmission shop, but also the Albany Hill Gas. And so, you know, I think there's still a fair amount of uncertainty around the design and how safe it would be for cyclists. So that's why it's at a conceptual stage.
Today I was, this is totally going off topic maybe, but driving on San Pablo at the bike lanes crossing Dartmouth on San Pablo, and every car was blowing through the red light. I mean, it was the red light because there were pedestrians crossing and people were ignoring them. It was insane. We might want to get our police out there ticketing people to get them a little more aware of the light. Or
Was the sun in their eyes? Was there some?
no, they
Fair
were
enough. It happens on
impatient.
Solano. But could you look into those spaces that are by the senior center?
I can ask. I'm not.
Reassignment
I'm
of
not
those
super
spaces?
familiar with the curb changes
Because
that occurred
it's just,
there.
you know, it's 13 spaces that had no time limit or anything, that have been, half of them have been converted to wheelchair accessible parking, which I can appreciate.
Is that
And
on
the other
the-
half is 4-hour parking.
the east side of the street next to
Yes.
that's the
Between
4-hour.
the senior center and Solano.
But the handicap spaces are on the
They're
west
mixed.
side?
They're kind of mixed,
Mixed
no.
in? Okay.
But this is the thing. It's wide open between the senior center and Washington. So why wouldn't you restrict between senior center and Washington and keep the commercial district's parking the way it is? So I just I would love to figure out, you know, is there a system in place that looks at these things, or?
Yeah, so we'll hear it next
Cool.
next
All right, excellent, thank you.
Would it be appropriate to also add to as a future agenda item, the marketing of our downtown area business district? Or is that more of a subcommittee kind
I
of?
think we can maybe discuss that as the short-term goal and bring it back as a report.
Okay.
So we'll set a meeting.
Okay.
right
I
now.
did send, I was worried about the Brown Act, but I did send, I think both of you actually, a video that Pleasanton had done that I thought would be a neat thing to do to market our area to
Okay.
potential
So
businesses.
when we meet in the short term, you can show that to the committee.
Okay.
Oh, good. Anything else?
Yeah, I'm curious about, I think it was 2 meetings ago, we had the young people that were doing the marijuana business were here. And I'm just sort of, I know there may have been some sort of moratorium on it. I don't know any of the background, but I am curious to know what the city's position is and whether or not there actually is money, what the tax thing is. Is there money that we should be thinking about?
So right now, the city adopted regulations in anticipation for the recreational laws going into effect. So that was passed in October last year. It extends the prohibition that was previously in place for up to 2 years. So at the sunset of that, we'll be coming back to the Planning and Zoning Commission and the City Council with a review of how it's working. And the intent behind that was really to see how the state licensing works out and if other cities have issues or if it runs smoothly. And I think the thinking was that if things actually go smoothly, the city at that point would consider lifting the prohibition and working towards regulations for the legal sale.
How long is the waterfront considered a third rail issue for this committee?
I guess in any specific context, like Golden Gate Fields or
Yeah, I mean, we were told that we weren't allowed to discuss it, basically, at the
Well,
very
I mean, I'll just
beginning.
say this, we got rid of the water, well, we didn't, but the council moved to get rid of the waterfront committee, so be careful what you wish for.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's a non-agenda.
At the moment, there aren't plans to develop that space, so it's really not a conversation to have right now. But
I mean,
certainly,
is-
if there
there
was
are
a
or are
time,
not?
there
There's
are not plans.
I mean, as far as we know, and we have an amenable relationship with the folks down there right now, as long as the current owner is alive, and he's alive and well, I don't think anything is going to happen there.
Okay.
Of course, if that changes,
Yeah, if
it
some
would be a
circum-
large community conversation that would definitely include this committee.
Well, actually, Golden Gate Fields is sponsoring this year's Solano Stroll. They're moving and shaking down there, and Stronach's fully involved apparently. So they want to.
wow.
They're kind of reinvigorating themselves apparently.
Great.
So it's October of 2020 that the moratorium on marijuana expires?
Well, technically,
Like a dog with a bone.
Well, 2
well,
years.
the way we,
I think you'd forget about the subject, but yeah.
Technically, it would be actually December, but where we left it with the council, and I put the reminder in my calendar, basically in July of 2019, we are going to go back to the commission's Planning and Zoning Commission with a study session item to see how it's all working, and then we would report back to council in September of 2019.
Any other items? Okay, so the committees are going to meet, and we'll report back, and then we have the parking changes that have occurred, expert to come talk to us, okay? Anything, okay, so that's
I have a question.
question, item 8.
The July meeting, are we postponing or
That was a
rearranging, or-
question we were going to ask since it's the day after July 4th, and we didn't know if members had vacation plans or if we were going to be able to get a quorum.
I'll be back.
I'm good with it. Yeah.
So let's keep it for now,
Okay,
and then.
sure. And we can also send emails to the
Yeah.
other committee members to see what their availability is.
Okay,
Is there,
Awesome.
well,
Pardon?
I'm just, it seems like there's certain faces that we don't see very often on the committee, and I was just curious how that works with, yeah, I mean, are they interested in staying on? Is there a process for?
We actually have some pretty strict rules about attendance, and so we need to go back and look at attendance for. I think it starts at the calendar year, but we're getting to a point where we may need to have those conversations with committee members who haven't been here a certain amount of times.
Good point.
I think there's actually a really strong interest in being on this committee.
Yeah, a number of people have asked me about it.
Yeah, apparently I had competed with 6 other people for my slot, so there was a big, a strong desire.
Way to go. You won out.
Yeah. Good job.
All right. With that, I'm going to adjourn the meeting. Dun, dun, dun,
And I would just like to thank the public for sharing your time with us this evening.
So let's pick a date.
Okay, can we do that like now?
Alan, do you want to be part of that process?